Here's an interesting secret with story writing. In the summer of 1981, a strange and terrifying pattern began to emerge in cities across America. In Los Angeles, 5 young, previously healthy gay men were diagnosed with a rare lung infection called pneumocystis carinii, pneumonia, or PCP. 2 of them had already died. Around the same time, in New York City and San Francisco, doctors were seeing a sudden, aggressive spike in cases of a rare skin cancer known as Kaposi's sarcoma. This cancer, normally seen in elderly men of Mediterranean descent, was now appearing in young, vibrant men, leaving purple lesions on their skin. It was a medical puzzle, a cluster of bizarre illnesses that seemed to have no connection, yet they were all happening at once, primarily within the gay community. The medical world was baffled. This was the first whisper of a storm that would soon engulf the entire globe. No one knew what it was. No one knew where it came from. The only certainty was the fear and the silence that followed. Doctors on the front lines, like Michael Gottlieb in LA, and Alvin Friedman Keene in New York, were the first to raise the alarm. They published their findings in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report on June 5, 1981. This small clinical report, tucked away in a medical journal, is now considered the official beginning of the AIDS epidemic. But back then, it was just a strange anomaly. The media initially called it the gay plague, or gay cancer, a cruel and stigmatizing label that isolated an already marginalized community. The patients were dying, their bodies wasting away from an unseen enemy that was systematically dismantling their immune systems. Doctors had a name for the condition they were seeing: gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID. The name itself was a scarlet letter, branding victims and creating a wall of prejudice that made fighting the disease even harder. The world was watching, but it wasn't helping. It was judging. The mystery deepened as the illness began appearing in other groups: hemophiliacs, who relied on blood transfusions, intravenous drug users who shared needles, and even Haitian immigrants started showing the same symptoms of catastrophic immune collapse. This was a critical turning point. It proved the disease wasn't exclusive to gay men. It was transmitted through blood. The name GRID was no longer accurate or fair. In 1982, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention officially renamed the condition Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, or AIDS. The name was more scientific, more accurate, but the stigma remained. The fear was now universal. Could you get it from a handshake? From a toilet seat? From a cough? Misinformation spread faster than the disease itself, creating a second epidemic of panic and persecution. People were fired from their jobs, evicted from their homes, and disowned by their families simply for being sick. The race was on to find the cause. 2 brilliant virologists on opposite sides of the Atlantic were locked in a fierce scientific battle in France. At the Pasteur Institute, Dr. Luc Montagnier and his colleague Franck Oyes-Barasinusi were meticulously studying tissue from a patient with swollen lymph nodes, an early sign of the mysterious illness. They isolated a new retrovirus, a type of virus that writes its genetic code into the host's DNA. They called it lymphadenopathy-associated virus, or LAVA. Meanwhile, in the United States, at the National Cancer Institute, the ambitious and famous Dr. Robert Gallo was also closing in. He had a reputation for discovering the first human retroviruses and was convinced he would solve this puzzle too. The competition was intense, fueled by national pride, personal ambition, and the desperate need for an answer. In 1984, the breakthrough was announced. U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Margaret Heckler, held a press conference to declare that Dr. Gallo had discovered the probable cause of AIDS. He called his virus H. It was, in fact, the same virus that the French team had discovered a year earlier. The announcement was a media sensation, but it sparked a bitter controversy over who deserved the credit and the patent rights for the blood test that would soon follow. This scientific rivalry, while creating conflict, ultimately confirmed the enemy. The virus was real, and it now had a name that would stick: Human Immunodeficiency Virus, or HIV. It was a cunning, microscopic assassin that specifically targeted the very cells meant to protect the body. The T helper cells of the immune system. With the killer identified, the world finally had a target. With the cause identified, the next chapter was one of activism and anger. The government's response had been agonizingly slow, marred by indifference and prejudice. President Ronald Reagan, who was in office when the epidemic began, didn't publicly mention the word AIDS until 1985, after thousands had already died. The gay community, left to fend for itself, organized, they created support networks, cared for their sick and dying friends when no one else would, and founded organizations like the Gay Men's Health Crisis. Out of this despair, a powerful new voice emerged. In 1987, a group of activists, led by figures like Larry Kramer, formed the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power or Act Up. Their motto was Silence Equals Death. They were loud, disruptive, and brilliant. They staged die-ins at the Food and Drug Administration, demanding faster approval for experimental drugs. They protested on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange to bring down the price of the first approved HIV drug, Azet, which cost an astronomical $10,000 a year. They weren't just fighting a virus. They were fighting a system that had left them to die. The cultural impact of the epidemic was profound. It cut down a generation of artists, writers, and performers. The death of actor Rock Hudson in 1985, a beloved Hollywood icon, forced mainstream America to confront the reality of AIDS. His friend, Elizabeth Taylor, became a tireless advocate, co-founding the American Foundation for AIDS Research. Princess Diana famously shook hands with an AIDS patient without gloves. A simple, powerful gesture that helped dismantle the myth that the disease could be spread by casual contact. The AIDS Memorial Quilt, a massive tapestry of panels commemorating lives lost, became a heartbreaking symbol of the scale of the tragedy. Art, theater, and music grappled with the grief and rage, producing masterpieces like Tony Kushner's Play Angels in America. The epidemic was no longer a secret whispered in the shadows. It was a global crisis playing out on the world stage. For years, an HIV diagnosis was a death sentence. The first drug, Azet, was highly toxic and only offered a brief reprieve. But in 1996, at the 11th International AIDS Conference in Vancouver, everything changed. A Canadian physician, Dr. Julio Montaner, presented groundbreaking research on a new treatment strategy called Highly Active Antiretroviral Therapy, or HAART. This wasn't a single drug, but a cocktail of 3 or more drugs that attacked the virus from multiple angles, preventing it from replicating. The results were miraculous. For patients in the clinical trials, their viral loads plummeted to undetectable levels. Their immune systems began to recover. The Lazarus effect, as it was called, saw people on the brink of death literally get up from their beds and return to life. For the first time, there was real, tangible hope. AIDS was no longer an immediate death sentence, but a manageable chronic illness. This victory, however, was not shared equally. While patients in wealthy, developed nations were starting to live long, healthy lives on AIDS, the drugs were far too expensive for the millions infected in sub-Saharan Africa, the epicenter of the global pandemic. The pharmaceutical companies held tight to their patents, and the price remained impossibly high. It was a crisis of conscience. Activists, world leaders, and organizations like Doctors Without Borders fought tirelessly for access to affordable generic medications. Their efforts led to landmark programs like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS, Relief PEPFAR in 2003, and the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. These initiatives poured billions of dollars into providing life-saving treatment to the world's poorest regions. It was a massive, unprecedented global health effort that has since saved millions of lives, proving that when the world decides to act, it can turn the tide against even the most formidable foe. Today, the story of HIV/AIDS is one of remarkable progress, but the fight is far from over. We have powerful prevention tools like PrEP, pre-exposure, prophylaxis, a daily pill that can prevent HIV infection. We have treatments that allow people with HIV to live normal lifespans and be unable to transmit the virus to others, a concept known as undetectable equals untransmittable U equals U. Yet, stigma and discrimination persists. Access to testing and treatment is still a challenge in many parts of the world, and a cure, the final chapter in this long saga, remains just out of reach, though scientists are closer than ever before. The history of HIV/AIDS is a story of a mysterious plague that became a global pandemic. It is a story of fear, prejudice, and devastating loss. But it is also a story of scientific genius, of fierce activism, and of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It's a reminder that in the face of the unknown, our greatest weapons are not just medicine and research, but compassion, courage, and the refusal to be silent. It's an interesting secret with story writing.